Halloween is a time for horror. The last 2 years I've done videos spotlighting horror stories around the sport of motor racing, and this time of year is the best for scares and urban legends. That's why this is the best time of year to talk about perhaps the scariest topic of all, Texas Motor Speedway. Now before you claim this is a knee-jerk reaction of sorts to the race there this October, or the All-Star Blunder in the summer, this video has been planned since March. This being an encapsulation of this track's horrific past and a legacy of nightmares. So, the events from this year are simply another mark on an already strenuous legacy. So, without further ado, let's go over the nightmares of Texas Motor Speedway. So let's start with its building. The track was under construction in 1996, the 1.5-mile Mega Speedway. It was going to be an SMI, or a Speedway Motorsports Inc., jewel of the westward expansion of NASCAR. It was in September of 1996, though, that an issue arose. The track was Texas International Speedway. It was named that to avoid a lawsuit from the Texas Thunder Speedway. SMI wanted to use its normal Motor Speedway naming convention, and by December of 1996, they finally reached an agreement. The track was officially named Texas Motor Speedway. Next for the track was establishing a date. 1997 saw the schedule expand to 32 races, with the addition of California Speedway out west. But SMI suggested 33 dates. NASCAR denied. Instead, SMI owner Bruton Smith and New Hampshire Speedway owner Bob Baer took matters in their own hands. They bought out the wavering North Wilkesboro Speedway and butchered their dates to give one to Smith's Texas and the other to Baer's New Hampshire. North Wilkesboro was famously left to rot. One of the favorite tracks on the circuit, North Wilkesboro was dead, and the Texas track was already getting off to a bad foot with the fans. Its first date was set for April 6th, 1997, a day many drivers would never forget. Let's get into the construction of Texas Motor Speedway. The track set out to be unique. The front stretch had an incredible seating structure down the entire straightaway. The size and span of it gave the atmosphere like a stadium, and overall everything was state-of-the-art. It looked perfect. Until you got down to the track. Nothing was done improperly when it came to construction. It was the theory behind it that left issues. Nowadays it is common to see progressively banked tracks, where the incline of banking increases steadily from the bottom groove to the top. But in 1997, this idea was primitive. So when the track tried to do such a thing, it was incredibly difficult to do. Instead of consistent banking transitions, much like a bowl, the banking changes were more sudden, causing these ripples as you turned over them. For anyone who's played a racing game or watched racing, imagine turning over the apron transition randomly, in multiple areas, and it not being visible to the naked eye. It made the track incredibly difficult to drive, and one of the first tests there in 1997, Ricky Craven had a crash that he credits with drastically hampering his career. He also says that was the worst crash of his career, even worse than this one. The few who tested sat uneasy of the track, and rains during opening weekend hindered the field from practice. By the time of race day, nerves and anticipation were overflowing. As expected by the few drivers who tested, the track wasn't prepared properly. A 13-plus car pileup takes out many contenders, and after 10 laps, they got it going again before another crash. 10 cautions in total on the day, and a 4-hour-long race. Jeff Burton won after Todd Bodine, who tried to race Burton, got wrecked driving for Ricky Craven's team whilst Craven sat out hurt. In terms of attendance, the track was a massive success. In terms of racing product, it was a massive failure. Living off the hype of the track can only get you so far before glaring issues from the product turned packed grandstands into empty bleachers. Therefore, over the 1997 season, construction again began on the Texas Motor Speedway. I'll preface this next section with this. Bruton Smith was a hell of a businessman. Like any other, he was fierce in his pursuit of success for his business. And like a fearless captain leading a battered ship through a hurricane, he wasn't going to bail on his vision. Whilst construction re-began on the track, Bruton contacted Bill France Jr. about the 1998 Cup schedule. He wanted Texas to have a second date. Gutsy from a man whose track put on a borderline disaster, Bill France instead said no, Strongly, matter of fact. So much so that Bruton got furious. He wasn't going to let the Francis get one up on him, so he started looking at alternatives to get Texas a second date. He looked at buying out various independently owned tracks to try and do the same thing he did to North Wilkesboro. The first he approached was Phoenix, to which the instant answer was no. The next he went to was Las Vegas, to which NASCAR stepped in and said no as well. Las Vegas was NASCAR's new market for 1998, being the 33rd date on the schedule, and Bill France did not need Bruton throwing his cash around to ruin that opportunity. The only track he made any progress on was Rockingham. Roger Penske stepped in and bought the track out in 1999. Penske was in the midst of being one of the biggest pawns in the infamous IndyCar split, and Rockingham for a short period of time was one of his weapons in his arsenal. Bruton, nearing the end of 1997, was running out of ideas to get a second date, so he turned to friendly fire. Talks began about moving the All-Star race to Texas, to which Humpy Wheeler, the track president of Charlotte, nearly went berserk. There was no way in hell he was going to let that happen, and Bruton soon realized the ramifications of doing such a thing. Still angry at NASCAR, it was rumored that Bruton got in contact with Tony George of Indianapolis Motor Speedway about possibly becoming a partner in a new stock car series. He wanted to start a stock car split over this, but Bill France caught wind of it and went into immediate panic trying to cool the stock car split flames. Bruton started planning an exhibition race at Texas in late December, which would run head-to-head against NASCAR's classic Suzuka Special. He was hoping that by just the appeal of no travel expenses alone, he would lure the drivers over. But no interest came, and officially, only one 1998 date would be granted. Celebrating NASCAR's 50th season, Jim Roper waved the green flag, and once again, nearly a dozen cars smashed up this time. The 1998 edition was better, however, but still the race was lackluster, ending in a Mark Martin victory over a surprising Chad Little. In 1999, a miracle happened. There wasn't an enormous crash early, and the race overall was decent. Terry Labonte won what would be his second to last race in his home state, and young Kenny Ehrman Jr. showed out early. In 2000, the track finally gave us our first iconic moment, Dale Earnhardt Jr.'s first career victory, a moment that still lives on in the history of the sport. Outside of the win, though, the race was caution-plagued, having the average green run only be 21 laps. Texas was looking good by this point in Cup. In trucks, however, during the 2000 truck race there, Tony Roper was killed, resulting in the first fatality at Texas. This was partially a result of the dogleg on the front stretch, which, while not unique to Texas, has always posed this type of safety issue for tracks that have had this configuration. Thankfully, Roper is the only driver fatality at Texas as of the making of this video. Texas entered what at least I consider its golden era from the early 2000s onwards. It became a good racetrack, not having a duplicate winner until 2007 when Jeff Burton ironically won his second race there. From there on, Carl Edwards won 3 races, becoming the most winningest driver until Jimmy Johnson knocked off 7. However, during this time, the track outside of racing was doing considerable damage to the sport. The second Texas date controversy became an issue again before 2004. Francis Furco, a minor shareholder in Speedway Motorsports Inc., filed a suit claiming that NASCAR had promised SMI a second date for Texas, and that since it had continued to fail to put a date on the schedule, it had violated various antitrust suits. This suit began in 2002, and what was to come from it was devastating for every party involved. This again created a massive divide between SMI and NASCAR, whilst entangling them in a controversy that damaged the sport's reputation in its max growth period. It took to 2004 to settle part of the case, which resulted in ISC, a subsidiary of NASCAR, being forced to sell Rockingham, losing its only Cup date after 2004. After that, the iconic racetrack went into tremendous turmoil. Rockingham has not held a Cup race since, and has only held 2 truck races in the last 20 years. One of its original 2 dates was given to Auto Club, which would also get the iconic Labor Day date from Darlington, effectively killing America's second oldest 500-mile racing tradition. All this reaction inspired another lawsuit with Kentucky Speedway, but that suit had little base and was dismissed in 2008. Shortly after that suit with Kentucky, though, SMI bought the track and butchered a date in 2011 from Atlanta to give to Kentucky, which in its short time on the schedule became known as one of the least favorite races for fans on the season. Atlanta, meanwhile, during that year put on one of NASCAR's greatest races. As for Furco, the suit in effect destroyed his personal life. He lost his job in food safety. He had to move to Atlanta to find a job with his wife. Their 20-year-old son stayed in Texas, though, and had a son. But when Francis Furco's grandson turned 6 months old, 20-year-old Anthony Furco took his life. To make matters even worse, Furco lost custody of his grandson, and then his wife divorced him. SMI, meanwhile, distanced themselves from him, trying to ensure NASCAR there would be no split. Furco has since stated that the entire suit is a regret to him. By 2016, Texas had moved past much of its horrid past. The track had finally, for years, put on quality racing. The track management had stabilized with litigation outlashes for race dates, and overall, everything seemed fine. That was until 2017. They announced they were reconfiguring the track, taking banking out of turns 1 and 2, and they repaved the nearly 20-year-old surface. The differing banking between turns 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, paired with the fresh pavement, created incredibly lackluster racing. They then put PJ1 down, which barely improved it. They also kept both races at 500 miles, making Texas one of the most dreaded races for fans. In 21, with an attempt to keep the 2 dates at Texas, they gave the track the All-Star race. Ironic, isn't it? The 2021 event was bland, with an incredibly confusing format. 2022, however, was a disaster. Probably the worst All-Star race ever. And I implore you to find a All-Star race with a worse controversy than this one. Nothing happened. Till the white flag, that is. Ricky Stenhouse Jr. scraped the wall and the caution came out. Came out in such a way that Blaney was only 100 feet from the line. But under All-Star rules, the race can't end under yellow. But since the caution was called so late, and the rules communicated so poorly, Blaney, thinking he had won the race, took his window net down. Now we're in a predicament. Instead of maybe ending the race or letting Blaney just come down and fix the window net and do no other service, they paced around and let him try and put it up himself. After some time, they checked in to see if it was up and saw this. We, however, saw this. They went green, and thankfully, since you couldn't pass, nothing happened. And Ryan still won the race, and the ultimate disaster was avoided. Now, people claim about this race that the almost screw over of Blaney was the worst part. But just imagine this. Imagine what hell NASCAR would be in if Blaney crashed with that window net down. Because who knows what would have happened. Back to the track, they have continued to put PJ1 down. But it's been found that the amount of PJ1 they have been applying has actually stuck to the track surface and filled the little gaps in the asphalt, creating a slick rubbery surface instead of the gritty asphalt surface. So in effect, when there's cold rubber on rubber, it creates the slickest racing surface imaginable. Therefore, Texas has now become forever a single groove racetrack. Moving on to the fall race this year, it was awful. Perhaps one of the worst races ever. 2 drivers got hurt, tire issues were insanely prevalent, and drivers kept slamming into one another. The entire race was a train wreck. This disaster pretty much underlines Texas's legacy in NASCAR, which is sad. The track they had for years after fixing it was great, and it always had the potential to right its wrongs from what it did to Darlington, Wilkesboro, and Rockingham. But now, it only has 1 date. Darlington has 2 again, and it has a Southern 500 date back on Labor Day. And Wilkesboro has just taken the All-Star race from it for 2023. It's poetic in a sense. Even Rockingham is rebuilding, repaving, and claiming back 20 years of obscurity. For Texas, its future is uncertain. A track reconfig is almost mandatory at this point, and nobody knows what to do with it. Turning it back to what it is feels pointless to a sense, and doing what they did to Atlanta might be too much of a test of driver loyalty. So what to do? The track reconfig is extremely limited in how they would be able to redesign it. You'd have to still put their turn 2 suites in view of the track to keep their value, while also making sure the front stretch grandstands have a view of the front stretch. Well, that's not even taking into account the backstretch TV they have built. Whatever idea they have, it's going to be extremely difficult for them to execute. And we can only hope for 2024 onwards, Texas can finally reclaim some of its glory.